All right, welcome everyone to our webinar today. We're going to go ahead and get started. Sorry for the short delay, we had a technical issue, but we're rolling now. So we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Laura. I work at Zoho. I'm one of our product marketing managers and I head up our sales enablement team. I work specifically on the CRM team. If you're not familiar with Zoho, we provide software for businesses who want to be more productive and who are looking for a simple integrated solution that they can run both their front and their back office business operations on. So we have over 35 products, one of which is our CRM software. I'd be here all day if I explain each product, and that's not what you're here for. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We're excited to partner with Rain Group and to present this webinar today. And I'd like to introduce you to Mike Schultz. He's the president of Rain Group, which is a sales performance and improvement firm with offices around the world. He's authored several books, including the Wall Street Journal bestseller Rainmaking Conversations and groundbreaking insight selling. Mike and Rain Group have worked with clients such as Fidelity Investment, Johnson & Johnson, Lowe's, HP, Oracle, Ryder, Harvard Business School, and the list goes on. So Mike is frequently a quoted expert in publications such as Inc., Forbes, and Business Week. And today he's here to share tips on what sales winners do differently. So with that, Mike, I'm going to pass it over to you and let you take over from there.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks to everyone who's joining us today. It is really great to be here. I'm excited to go through this content because I happen to love this particular subject. And this particular subject reminds me of the two sales guys that are talking at the end of the day, and one sales guy turns to the other and he says, hey, how was your day? The other sales guy says, oh, I had a great day. I have been working on a proposal and I just got out a preliminary view to one of my buyers and they said, this is looking really exciting, I can't wait to share it with the team. And I talked to one of our accounts and they said it looks good for renewal next year. And I've been working to try to break into a new prospect for about a year now. And they finally said, sure, why don't you come in for a meeting? So I had a great day. And he turns to the other sales guy and he says, how was your day? And the other sales guy says, well, I didn't sell anything either. And that's the great thing about sales is that you can have all this different kind of activity. You can work really hard. You can do all sorts of different kinds of things throughout the day, and it still comes down to results. Now, the world of sales has been changing quite a bit. Oh, I would even say in the last five and even 10 years. And it's changed more in the last 5-10 years than it had in the previous 40. You could literally fall asleep in 1989 having read Spin Selling, woken up in 2003, applied the techniques, and it would all be just fine. But it doesn't just work like that anymore. You have to do new and different things. And people have been writing about that, and they've been saying, oh, here's how it's changed. So we wanted to know how it was changed, and we figured we'd study it. And we're going to show you some of those different kinds of things that we found through the Rain Group Center for Sales Research Studies. So with that, I have a challenge to myself. I'm hoping that throughout this webinar, you'll do one of three things. You will learn something that you didn't know, even if after one webinar there's one nugget that you say, hey, I didn't know that. 2, you might think something differently. And 3, you might say, well, you know what? Because of what I saw today, I'm going to take an action. So I hope that we can get to the point where we do pretty well on that. So without further ado, I would like to start sharing with you some of the content. Now we have a lot of content. We're going to go fast-paced. We'll see if we have some time at the end for Q&A. But for now, let's just go ahead and get started. So I think people overcomplicate sales. Sales is about value. This value that we know that we can offer. Oh, if my buyers only knew what I knew about the difference that we can make for them, they would buy a ton more. The challenge is it's in my head and it's not in their heads. If it was in their heads, we'd make a ton of sales. And that's really the crux of it. If they knew what we knew, they'd buy it. But except there's this gap in the middle. And this is a gap of communication, which is great. This is why we have jobs, because our jobs as salespeople is to have conversations. this is what we do. So what we wanted to study was, what do salespeople that have the best sales conversations do? And we wanted to study it through the lens of the buyers. So we did. We studied 731 business-to-business purchases to figure out what the winners of these purchases, the sales winners, did most differently from the seller that came in the closest second place. Except they came in second place, there might have been a sliver of difference, but one guy leaves with a 10-year revenue stream of $5 million, and the other guy gets the steak knives. Because whatever happened in that sliver of difference has such a huge impact on the seller's success. So we wanted to know, what did sales winners not just do differently, but do most differently? So I mentioned we studied 731 business-to-business purchases. This was from buyers that represented $3.1 billion in products and services purchased. And we then had over 300 conversations with buyers to understand what they actually went through and what they thought of sellers while they were purchasing for them. So before we move into what we found, I would like to ask you all a question. Let's see if we can make sure that this poll works. So I'm going to slide out of here, pull up the poll, and I would like to ask you to answer the following questions. What do you think sales winners did most differently? We studied 42 factors. I'm just going to go ahead and launch it. So I believe I have launched the poll. What do you think sales winners did most differently? There are a series of choices on your screen. And if you could just go ahead and pick them, what you think sales winners did most differently, then we will launch the results of the poll. And we studied 42 different factors. These are just 6 of them, and 3 of them were the top. Okay, so let's stop there. I'm going to hit close, and I'm going to share the results. So it looks like 79% said listened or collaborated with me. 46 said educated me with new ideas and perspectives. 6% said persuaded me we would achieve results. 88% said understood my needs. That looks like it was number 1. And 51% said was trustworthy. I can tell you that for the most part, what you guys, mostly I'm guessing sellers, some of you might be buyers as well, but what you guys just guessed that the buyers said were most differently, 2 out of 3 you are wrong. It looks like there was 1 combined there, so in part 3 out of 3 were wrong. So let's go ahead and see what the buyers said the sellers did most differently. Okay, so here's what we found. We found, and this is in sum, and this isn't just the 42 factors, but just as we studied the research and we did different kinds of regression analysis to understand what was important, what the buyers cared about, and what affected their decisions, and what their perceptions of sellers were, it was all kind of confusing, but we boiled it down to 3 things. There were 3 things that sellers did that created one effect that then got them the win. And that's what we're going to cover throughout this webinar. So let's take a look at, as we unveil what these 3 things are, let's take a look at what people are saying about the world of selling. So here's a somewhat recent article, 2011, from the Harvard Business Review, and it said, selling is not about relationships. Now I could have put a poll up and said, hey, who thinks selling is about relationships? And almost everyone would say yes. But these are the kinds of things that people are saying, well, you know, it's changing, it's different. This isn't what buyers care about. So this is one of the reasons why we started studying this. Well, what do buyers care about? And it reminded me of this story that when I was, a young whippersnapper going on 20 years ago, I was working at a company. We were going public. I was running a division for the first time, and I saw the CFO. And I said, hey, we just selected one of the big 5. There were 5 at the time. We picked one of the big 5 accounting firms to take us public. And I said, why did we pick the one that we picked and didn't pick the other ones? And he said, well, come on down to my office. And I went down to his office, and he had this big poster board that he had presented to the board of directors. And we had firm A, B, C, D, and E with their names. Across the top, we had 12 factors, and they were all weighted average. And he said, based on my analysis, et cetera, you can see that firm C is definitely the firm that was most qualified to work with us. So we picked them. It's like, wow, cool, I'm getting an education in decision making from senior executive right now. And I thought that was really interesting. And he said, do you want to know why we really picked them? And I said, sure. And he said, close the door. So I closed the door, and he said, well, I like them. I like them best. And he said, all right, so I'll tell you a little bit more. It's not so simple as some grid. I'm the one that has to work with them 15 hours a day for the next 9 months to take us public. I see them all the time. And I need people that I feel like I can communicate with, I can interact with. And so I'm just going to say, boil it down to like, and I like them best. He said, that grid that I showed you before, I can make that look like whatever the hell I want it to look like. So one of the questions was just personal connection. Does it still matter? And we're going to share with you what our research showed about that in just a minute. Now, another thing that you've seen, and the reason I'm putting up Harvard Business Review publications is because if it's in the Harvard Business Review, it's at least a part of the mainstream discussion about selling, about business. If it's in the Harvard Business Review, people pay attention to it as something that is meaningful and probably well vetted. Well, here we have the end of solution sales. Well, is this true? Is this the case? This was only a few years ago. This was published. Well, let me show you what we found in just a minute. But think about solution sales. Regardless of where you might have learned it, regardless of which book on consultative or solution selling that you might have read, the fundamental construct comes down to this. Understand need, which you guys all picked as the top thing that sales winners did differently. Craft a compelling solution. Present solution persuasively. And win. Understand need, craft solution, and win. There you go. So is that over? Is that done? Are those things not important? Well, let me show you of the top 10 things. Here are some of the things that we found. Understood my needs and crafted a compelling solution were number 5 and number 7 that the sales winners did most differently. So to be able to say that it's the end of solution sales, I think is kind of a tragedy. Because anyone that sort of reads that title and might even read the highlights of that, they started to apply it, they're going to be in trouble because they're going to stop selling like winners. And they're going to start doing things like the second place finishers do. So that ain't so good. So understood my needs, crafted a compelling solution. 2 other things that we found were listened to me and connected with me personally. Now, I've done quite a bit of research on what makes for people liking each other and what makes for rapport building, what makes for affinity, and listen to me is a big one, and just connected with me personally. I liked them. I felt like we had something in common. Similarity is one of the 4 rapport principles. If you Google 4 principles of rapport, you'll find a blog post on our website about it. So is selling about relationships? According to our sales winners research, it sure is. And is solution selling dead? Is it over? Is it the end of solution sales? According to our research, no. So these are some of the things that we found. You guys picked listened to me and understood my needs as in the top 3. They weren't. That was pretty close. I had it as 4 and 5. I also had crafted a compelling solution, and that wasn't there either. So let's move on, but before we do, for any of you that actually want to see this research report, you can either hop on to Amazon.com and buy the book Insight Selling, and if you want just some of the data from the report and the summary, just send me an email. Just email me and I'll get it over to one of my staff folks and they'll send you a little 10-page report called What Sales Winners Do Differently. And we'll do it after the webinar so we can do all of our awesome revealing today. But if you want, just send me a note to my email and I'll get you that report. So, quick closing of that front part of those 3 things that I said. 3 things: create one effect, and it gets you the win. I'm going to unveil what that one thing is in a second. But I showed all of this research to Neil Rackham. I mentioned Spin Selling earlier in the webinar. Neil Rackham wrote Spin Selling. It's one of the most purchased sales books ever. Neil Rackham is like the grandfather of our industry, well-respected guy. Now, he looked over this research. We spent some time at his house in Virginia. He looked over the research for a day, and he said, I'm going to write the foreword to your book. Which is great, because he only does one foreword a year, so I was very honored. Here are a couple of things he said in the foreword. So he says, I ask you to forgive me a moment's bitching if I pick out a particularly unhelpful trend in many of these about to become best-selling business books, especially those in sales that use what I call the Armageddon selling formula. The approach goes something like this. Everything you've ever learned about sales is wrong, and unless you stop doing it instantly, your sales efforts will die shortly in agony. There is, however, one simple cure that I've discovered in it, and here the author puts in a pitch for my appropriate magic bullet, etc., etc. But then he goes on to say the following. He calls this the Armageddon approach to selling. The Armageddon approach to sales doesn't help anyone. When, for example, a serious journal like the Harvard Business Review publishes an article titled The End of Solution Sales, it damages the credibility of all involved. The sales field has been growing up nicely in recent years. It can live without this kind of overstatement. So, here's what we found. The sellers that won indeed connected, much to the opposite of what the Harvard Business Review and many people are saying. Relationships and solution selling are alive and well, which we tend to refer to as consultative selling. So we say that the winners, they connect. They connect with people, and they connect the dots. So the winners connect, and that's the one thing that they do. That's the first one. However, if they only connected, they didn't win. They had to do more than just connect, because if they only did those things, they didn't do the top things that the winners did, and they didn't round out the rest of the story to pull away with the win. So let's talk about what the rest of those things are as we continue along. So, who's this? This is Franz Anton Mesmer. In the latter half of the 1700s, Franz Anton Mesmer, who was an astrologist and a physician, used to treat his patients by looking deeply into their eyes and waving magnets in front of their faces. Dr. Mesmer believed that there were barriers in all of our bodies that disrupted the natural flow of the processes that give us life and health. He also believed that this like really weird penetrating eye gazing and this object waving, it would restore the natural order inside of his patients, and it relieves all sorts of maladies. In fact, it is reported that Dr. Mesmer could cure headaches, swooning, blindness, paralysis, and a long list of other ailments, including hemorrhoids, which I always found kind of interesting when I read it. So this guy, Mesmer, became quite the celebrity, and at one point he was touring major cities across Europe, demonstrating the efficacy and power of his medical advances. It's also reported that as he worked with his patients, he gained complete control of not just their actions, but of their thoughts, their perceptions of reality, and their feelings. So it's kind of, I can just imagine being there and watching all this happen. And when he did this, the patients that he was treating were said to be mesmerized. And thus, a new word was born. All right, so why should you care? Well, first of all, you are unlikely to forget the origin of the word mesmerized because you learned it in the context of a story. At least you're more likely to remember it than if I simply said, the word mesmerized originates from Dr. Franz Mesmer, whose techniques became the basis for modern-day hypnotism. But the sellers that win use the power of story to mesmerize. And they did just like what the good doctor did to his patients. They took control of not just actions, but perceptions and feelings. They just do it without all the magnet waving and all the creepy staring. So it is true that sellers weave a story, and that story is compelling. And the sellers that win they convince. So they connect and they convince. And they convince in three ways. I'm going to share those three ways. So one, who's this? For those of you that are in the United States, perhaps some other countries, you might recognize Ralphie. Ralphie is in the movie A Christmas Story. And what does Ralphie want? Ralphie wants a BB gun. But does he want just any BB gun? No, he wants a Red Ryder carbine action 200-shot range model air rifle with the compass in the stock and the thing which tells time. And does he want it? Does he want it bad? Does he want it really bad? Does he want it really, really bad? I'm from Massachusetts. He wants it wicked, wicked bad. Now, we know of all that value that we offer. And if we were our buyers, we would buy it because it makes such a great difference. And it's almost a shame that they're not buying it. We know they should buy it. But right now, many of them just have no perception that they should even buy it. But at the end of every sale, they should have that same feeling that Ralphie has. And the sellers that won would resonate with buyers to the point where they felt the same way. They felt that they really wanted or needed something. They were convinced that they wanted or needed something. Now, I know plenty of people that want or need something, and I've talked to a bunch of buyers. And I talked to this one buyer once where, just as a function of what we do here at Rain Group, we do postmortems on sales. And I talked to a buyer once where the seller, it was a technology, the seller said, oh, they were going to spend $400,000, they were going to get a $4 million return in about a year, and it was going to last for 5 years, and it wasn't going to cost them much year after year. You know, the returns were 10x in the first year, and then just continued along from there. But they didn't buy it. After 8 months, and all these presentations, they didn't buy it. So I talked to the buyer, and I said, after 8 months, he didn't buy it. Did you not, see the great return on investment? He's like, oh, I saw it. I wanted it, but I just didn't believe it. So the buyers, if you put yourself in the buyer's position, they see this value. They know the value. Sometimes they don't, but let's say they do. But they've been burned before. For any of you that have ever done any kind of home remodeling, what the guys say they're going to do and what they actually do, what the experience is like, they don't necessarily jibe. So we bought things before and they don't work out. But the sellers that won were able to make that perception of risk, that we could take a leap of faith and fall, that the risk of taking the leap of faith that we'll jump over the chasm, we won't fall down and crash and burn, but we'll be able to actually get that value. So it's fear that holds them back, and the sellers that won are able to convince buyers that the risk is appropriately small, that the return is worth it, the maximum return, resonate, and the risk is appropriately small, or they substantiate their messages and claims. So the third thing, and I'm just going to share it with you because it should make sense to all of us, is that the sellers that win convince buyers that they are the best choice among other options. So buyer, think about a buyer. I really want this. It's worthwhile to do it. It's worth the risk. Now I have options. Where should I buy it, and who should I do it with? The sellers that won are able to convince buyers that they're the best choice. So all in, we call this maximum return, minimum risk, and the best choice. This is essentially the case for a value proposition. So I have a question again for you all, and I'm going to pull up a poll. Our sales organization focuses on driving maximum value for the customer. Tell me what you think, not just about you, but think about your sales organization. Do you as a whole focus on driving maximum value for the customer? I see the results are pouring in here. All right, fabulous. I'm going to go ahead. People are voting. I am going to close the poll and share. So it looks like 29% of you strongly agree, 47% agree, 18% are neutral, and 5 disagree. You guys are much better than our research because we had as many people disagree and be neutral in our research study as they agreed. So this is indeed what we found. Now, at the end of every sale, and this is more just content for the argument that you should make to buyers. Let's say you have gone through your process, you spent X amount of months or however long it is, and your buyer is ready to buy, and they say, I'm doing it. But this is a big thing, and so I at least have to present it to my peers before I go ahead and make this decision 100% final. Before I make it 100% final, I need to present it to my peers. What you want them to do is they need to be able to explain, even in just 15 minutes, why we want to do this, what's resonating with us, why it's going to work, why the message has been substantiated to me, why the risk is low or appropriately low, and why I want to pick these guys. So if you as a seller can resonate, substantiate, and differentiate, not only do you get sales wins, but you get premium fees, and our research shows that you're also more likely to get loyalty. Now, here's a little bit of the in-depth content that we talked about in this webinar. There are a couple of different ways that you should resonate, differentiate, and substantiate. First, in Resonate, everyone knows that they need to present an ROI case, and I talked about that before. But it is my opinion, and my opinion based on my research and the various things that I have read and studied, is that buyers do buy with their hearts and justify with their heads. They want something. They can see their promotion. They can see themselves hitting their bonuses. They can feel the success that will happen when things work out well, and then they're able to make the presentation, much like Peter McKenzie did to me when he told me why he picked one particular firm. Then they make the case of why they want to do something. So you should make sure that you resonate emotionally as well as rationally. To substantiate, buyers are going to be judging 4 different things. It's not just whether your product or service is going to work. You have to substantiate that they will believe you. Because if they think you're full of it, they're going to take everything you say with a grain of salt. So you have to be trustworthy. They have to believe your offering will perform as described. They have to believe in your company. So for example, some of you might know LL Bean based out of Maine. I once had someone from LL Bean in one of my workshops, and they said, well, LL Bean is a little bit more expensive, and we're not exactly fashion forward, but we do pretty well. And the answer to that has always been their guarantee. No matter what, even after 20 years, if you've worn through something and you send it back, no questions asked, we'll send you a new one or give you the equivalent value. So the company makes a difference. And finally, and this is what the buyer didn't buy before, he might have trusted the person, the offering, and the company, but the question is, am I going to get the ROI that I want to get? And then finally, with differentiate, it's not about some unique selling proposition. Some of you might have heard that, and in the webinar description we said, what's the advice that you shouldn't take? Well, besides not listening to the Harvard Business Review, when people say, what's your unique selling proposition? What's the one thing? Well, you know, purchases aren't based on one thing. Purchases are based on an overall distinction that for these 7 factors, this is why I'm buying something. And then a perception of scarcity, which is, you know, you might think this is a dime a dozen, but there really are differences, and good value is hard to find. Now, for those of you who might be in leadership, I want to share with you some of the results of another study called the Top Performing Sales Organization, where we studied organizations that had higher win rates, better revenue growth, better margin growth, and a number of other things that made their sales organization, they hit their goals, the goals were challenging. I'm going to share with you from this sort of management leadership type research some of the things we found about what happens when the buyer thinks the overall value is superior. So we studied organizations that were the best at driving this sort of value proposition. Now, here's what we found. I mentioned that win rates were higher. On average, the win rate of all the companies we studied 472 companies, the win rate on proposals or quoted business was 47%. But when organizations focused on value, the win rate was 54%. Now, if you do the math on increasing your win rate from 45 to 54%, that means if you have 100 proposals, instead of closing 45, you close 54. That's a lot more business. The leverage here is huge. A couple of other things that we found, they were much more likely to grow their revenue if they drove value. And as well on the right there, they had lower undesired turnover. Now, we don't want to just look at turnover, like how many salespeople did you lose, because sometimes salespeople are not very good. we asked people about the salespeople they lost that were excellent. And they had, the value-driving organizations had lower undesired turnover. It means they kept their better people. Now, there's one last slide for the managers I just wanted to share, is why. Why might that be? Why might they stay? Because they didn't find much, to the extent that I know, differences in compensation, but they believed in what they were selling. It wasn't just hit quota or you're fired. It was all couched in a genuine focus on making a difference for buyers. And when that was true, when they met our value-driving sales organization criteria, we found that the culture was much more likely to support motivation. The sellers' attitudes were extremely positive towards their companies. And this was a big kicker for a lot of the sales managers that we've shared this with and leaders of organizations. If your sellers perceive that you actually drove maximum value for customers and everyone was serious about it, well, it was awesome that more sellers woke up and worked really hard to pursue top performance. So it was really cool. So it's not just an effect of buyers making more purchases, but it's also an effect of sellers being more passionate and being more energetic and having more enthusiasm for selling for your company. So I don't want to spend too much time on the manager stuff, but I did want to share that for those of you, as long as you're not one of our direct competitors, if you want to send me an email, I can get you our top performing sales organization research report, which is typically only available to our clients. Again, just email me directly, mschultz@raingroup.com, and I will get that to you. So closing up the second part is that the sellers that one connect, they also convince. When they do that, they maximize the value. And then there's one other thing that they do to get that maximum perception of value from the buyers that gets them the win, and we're going to cover that now. But first, a little interlude, because this idea of making sure that you're getting the best points across about how buyers can get the best returns, about how buyers can get the best results, this can happen across the sales cycle. So here's a typical selling cycle. These are the labels that we use at Rain Group for our sales cycle analysis, and we juxtapose it with the buying process. So at first, a buyer is defining their vision. They're either passively or actively dissatisfied, and then if they go to take some action about being dissatisfied, they start to analyze, what can I do about this? Where can I get to? What new results should I have? So they're doing their analysis. At this point, we are prospecting to try to find people who are passively or actively dissatisfied who might be willing to talk to us. And as we start to talk to them, their analysis changes about what their needs are and what the possibilities are. And we're either discovering what their needs are or we're sharing with them new ideas about what's possible that is shaping their agenda for action. So they are defining their vision and shaping their agenda for action. The second part of the buying process, they're saying, all right, well, what intervention? What could we do here? What are our different options? Let's say it's revenue growth. Well, it could be sales, it could be marketing, but it's not just marketing. It could be website, it could be PR, it could be direct marketing, it could be search engine optimization, it could be a ton of different things. It could be content, could be messaging, could be brand. So what are the different things that we could do to drive revenue? Okay, now that we know which solution we're going to go with, we are going to select a provider that might help us, and then we're going to commit to doing something with someone, and at that point the seller gets the win, and then we are going to focus on driving results where we will implement, and as sellers we do account development. Now there are all sorts of things that you can do to drive maximum impact and maximum value that buyers really like, and those are things like in the early phase, you can introduce new possibilities and options to buyers. Technologies they didn't know about, methodologies they didn't know about, decision-making processes they didn't know about, results that similar companies or dissimilar companies have achieved. You can show how their results are different. They might say we're growing at 10% and that's fine, but what if you show them that they could be growing at 20%? Well, maybe they have a certain market share, it should be more. Maybe they think their operations are fine, but they can have even more efficiency. And here's how. And by doing that early in the process, you can drive strategic conversations, decision-making conversations, direction-setting conversations about what's possible. And this middle part, let's say they come to you looking for that intervention. You haven't talked to them in the early part, but you get an RFP. I don't know about you, but when I get an RFP, it's not the case that they ask for the right things. It's not the case that they ask for them the right way. It's not the case that they're couching their questions properly. It's not the case that they're going to get the maximum value from what they're buying based on how they wrote the RFP. And often they're too focused on price versus return, and that is short-term thinking, shooting them in the foot, and not even necessarily going to get them off the ground. When you get an RFP, or even just a buyer asking you and saying, hey, we want to do this, there are things that you bring to the table that can enrich that, and it's up to you to reframe. When you reframe, you change the buyer's concept of what they need to do, what they need, what they should do, what's possible, or what might happen. Hey, if you buy it just like this, whether you buy it from us or someone else, these are the eventualities. It's going to fail because of this. It's going to fall apart because of that. There's risk here. Maybe they don't want that. And they thought, oh, maybe I need to spend more. Maybe I need to be more rigorous about this. And then finally, let's say they bought it. I know lots of companies that buy things and they have buyer's remorse. It didn't work the way they wanted. It didn't work the way it was depicted. You can help them avoid delivery pitfalls. You can add unexpected help and service, and you can maximize, by doing so, you maximize their investment value. When you do, two things happen. One, they're way more likely to buy it again, and two, they're way more likely to buy more things from you. So the question is, how do we implement this? What are the best things that we should do in our conversations and selling activities to make these things come alive? Well, let me share with you another story. So this gentleman here is one of the fathers of organizational behavior. And in the 1940s, during the war, World War II, he ran a study. He ran a study of housewives and what he wanted the housewives to do. And yes, this is the terminology that they used so many years ago. We want to get housewives to serve organ meat to their families, like liver and kidneys and yucky sounding things like that. So when he did this, he split the groups and he did the study. Well, by the way, his name was Kurt Lewin. When he did this study, he split the study groups into two. The first study group, he had his team lecture them on all the reasons and benefits of eating intestinal meat. He applied social pressure on them, and he played on the homemaker's sense of patriotism. You'll help the war effort. They even brought in other people to talk about testimonials of how much they loved organ meat and how much their families loved it. Brought in chefs to give them recipes to try. And the second group, he led it a little bit differently. He said, I want you guys to serve your families organ meat. Does anyone have any ideas? And from there, he led a somewhat unstructured, facilitated discussion, drawing out all the ideas of the people in the audience. Now, you might guess, this one's a loaded question. I won't even do a poll on it because everyone guesses right on this one. Which group served more organ meat to their families? Well, the group that was pitched to, 3% of them served organ meat to their families. And the group that was collaborated with, that they had the facilitated discussions, where the people in the room came up with the ideas, they were 32%. 32% of them served organ meat to their families. Now, we found the exact same thing in our research. 2.8 times more likely were the sellers that won to have collaborated with buyers. The buyers said literally almost 300% more that they observed collaborative behaviors and they felt collaborated with by the sellers that they awarded the business to. The more they were pitched, the more the guys, the more they awarded the business to someone else. but when they felt like they were part of the process, they selected that seller so much more often. That was the number 2 thing, and I don't think anyone picked that for the top 3. And then finally, the number 1 thing that sales winners did most differently was that they educated buyers with new ideas and perspectives. This one was at 300%. The sellers that won were 3 times more likely to have their buyers say, we were educated with new ideas and perspectives. Now, the kinds of new ideas and perspectives that these buyers saw, like how they got these buyers to think differently, and again, they were new ideas and perspectives. And this is, again, a part of the content that we just want to bring, not just the research results, but the content. Every time you interact with the buyer, for every sales meeting, whether it's a presentation or discussion, you want them to learn something new, you want them to feel a certain way, and you want them to take action. And if you can ask yourself, what do I want to learn for this conversation? Well, what they're doing right now is not serving them, and that there is a new way to approach something, or at least a new way for them to approach it that's going to get better results. And that if they do these 3 things, it'll really work. And if they do that, they're going to get certain results. And when they get certain results, maybe they will feel so much less frustration when the thing breaks down the weekend and they have to go in and fix it. And they'll feel more successful, and they'll make some more money. So, their families will pat them on the back, and they'll feel proud. And you don't just walk up to them and say, you'll feel proud when your families pat you on the back and tell you how great you're doing, but they will. But you have to ask them how I want them to feel, and then what do I want them to do? I want them to try the sample. I want them to go through this 2-week process. I want them to have a 2-hour collaborative discussion where we work out their problems. I want them to, whatever it is that you want them to do next. If you can think to yourself in any sales meeting or conversation, what do I want to learn, what do I want to feel, what do I want them to do, then you know what your outcome is. And then when you do it, don't just pitch at them. Collaborate with them. Because the buyers that feel collaborated with and the buyers that feel educated with new ideas and perspective are much more likely to select you as the winner. So this is the punchline here, and this is the 3rd thing. The sellers that win connect, convince, and collaborate. When they do, they maximize their buyer's perception of value, and they win. So to summarize everything, there's this one concept that I want to leave you with and share one other thing. We know about this impact that we can have on our buyers. We talked about the value, and we know that we need to seem different. The problem is with that sort of resonate, differentiate, substantiate is the differentiate part all the time. We think we're different, but in the buyer's eyes, they tell us, I feel like I could buy the same thing or a similar thing from many providers. Here's how to get over that. Often, if we get an RFP or if a buyer asks us, they define the need. Hey, I'm looking to do this. I'm looking to do these kinds of things. We have or don't have a budget, but this is what we're trying to achieve, and this is what we're thinking of buying. Oftentimes, buyers define the need. When they do, just like I mentioned in those RFPs, they're vision constrained. They're not asking the right questions. They're not taking the right long-term view. They're asking for things cheap. They're not going to get the right value. It's not going to work as well. It's just vision constrained. We know that. And if they send an RFP, or they just ask 4 other vendors to bid on it, and we all just answer the RFP, it's a capabilities battle. And that's hard to do these days because buyers perceive us to be similar. So we don't want to do that. Now, with that vision constrained buyer-defined need, the value that we can bring to the table is only at a certain level. But if the seller redefines the need, then we as sellers can unexpectedly unleash impact. And that value possibilities frontier goes higher. That if, well, geez, don't think short term. What about these 3 other things? Why not the 5 other divisions getting in on it? Buy this at an enterprise level and you're going to get 30% higher returns. You're going to have a lot less frustration. Your costs are going to go way down. All the divisions will be able to talk to each other. You'll have real-time data. It'll work faster. Your brand will get better. Your customers will be retained more. You'll be faster to market. Whatever those things are, if you change their perception of what's possible by educating them with new ideas and perspectives and not pitching it to them, but having collaborative discussions where they start to come up with those ideas with you, all of a sudden they say, aha, and they get excited. And the thing is that they don't expect this from buyers. Forrester Research had a study that said only 38% of buyers found their discussions with salespeople valuable. When they get an idea that they can act on, 100% of them find those conversations valuable. So if the seller can redefine the need, they unexpectedly unleash value. Now, that unexpectedly is important. It's just like that Disney concept from years ago of surprise and delight. It's surprise and delight. Now, when you do this, you don't just unexpectedly unleash value, but if the other guys aren't doing it, and according to our research, most of them aren't, then they are responding to an RFP. Maybe they're doing old-style consultative selling, and they're trying to uncover need, and that's great. And then they respond to that need, and that's great. But if you actually change the conversation and redefine the need, then they're still going to be fighting over the RFP, and you've literally you've moved the goalposts. Now that is impressive. So if you can do that, then you add value in both ways. And it makes me think of that that best-selling business book called Blue Ocean Strategy. Now, in Blue Ocean Strategy, they say, don't launch products and services in areas where there are other products and services, even if you think you have a little bit of a better mousetrap, because you're fighting over an existing market, and you're in this sort of red ocean of blood where all the sharks try to get the same morsels. Instead, do something completely different, and if it catches, you have a window of opportunity where you can just fish in the blue ocean and just reel in the boat. Now, sellers can do this regardless of whether the buyers perceive their products and services to be commodities. Because if they can help them get better impact, if they can help them make better decisions, then the seller adds the value, and the buyers want the seller there, and they pick that seller more often, and that seller can then bring their capabilities to the table for the buyers. So regardless of whether or not you have commoditized products and services, every seller on this call has the ability to sell in the blue ocean, to move the goalposts, and to beat their competitors in ways that their competitors can't even compete with. So one last thing before I close up. If you want to be notified when we have new research, we publish things every month. Again, just send me an email. Say, hey, let me know about new research. It's mschultz@rangegroup.com. All this stuff is free. I'm glad you're on the Zoho webinar today, and I'm happy to provide some of the more detailed background information on everything that I talked about. So with that, I will close up, and I think we might have a minute or two for questions. So I started this webinar saying that selling is not so complicated. If you have this value that you know is going to make a huge difference, it's in your head, it's not in the buyer's head, but if it was, they'd be buying. The things that you need to do to get that value message across are connect, convince, and collaborate. Pretty simple. It reminds me of the story of the Rabbi Hillel about 100 years BC. He went to Babylon as a young man, and he became a leader in the community and a rabbi. He was kind of on the open-minded and liberal side of things, and he had another counterpart in town named Shammai, who was a little bit more on the conservative and strict constructionist of the Torah kind of guy, but they were both leaders in the community. Another 13-year-old boy came into town one day, and he went to the Rabbi Shammai, and as 13-year-old boys are often like, he was a little bit snotty, and he said to Shammai, I want to learn everything there is about the Torah, and I want you to teach it to me while you stand there on one leg. And so Shammai kicked him to the curb and told him what he could do with his demands. But again, 13-year-old boy, undeterred, he tried again, and he tried with the Rabbi Hillel. He went to Hillel and he said, I want to learn everything there is about the Torah, and I want you to teach me about it while you stand there on one leg. So Hillel lifted up his leg and he said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That is the total lesson of the Torah. Now, do what you need to do, study what you need to study, and learn what you need to learn to be able to live that message. So I'll say to you all, connect, convince, and collaborate. When you do, you will unleash value, study, and learn what you need to learn to be able to live that message. So with that, I will say thank you very much. My email, again, is on the screen here. If anyone wants these reports or to be notified of new research, just send it along to me. I'll make sure that happens. And I will turn it over to our friends at Zoho if there are any questions while we round out the hour.
All right. Thank you, Mike. There's a couple questions. If you have a second, you can maybe answer them. One from Heather. She's asking, is there much difference in this type of selling process if you're selling a product or a widget versus if you're selling a professional service, or is it kind of the same?
No, not really, unless you're literally selling paper clips. Things tend to be more common than paper clips. But even if you are selling paper clips, people can do this with office supplies. Oh, geez, you're just looking for the cheapest blah, blah, blah. Well, I tell you what, why don't we make sure all of your office supplies are going through us? We can make sure it comes in 24 hours. We'll consolidate it. We'll have real-time blah, blah, blah. And by the way, we'll come in and organize your inventory system to make it so you don't even have to walk around and order things. We'll have someone walk through. You'll tell us the inventory that you need, and you'll never be bitched at again by someone who says we're out of AA batteries. Really? You willing to do that? It's not just about, yeah, sure. Oh, well, I didn't really even think about that. It's solving a need I wasn't thinking, and it's going to save me 4 hours a week, and blah, blah, blah. So that's office supply guys selling paper clips aren't doing this. So you can usually take your product, and most products are at least somewhat more sophisticated than that, and help buyers apply what you do and be better in your area than they would be without your conversations. You can help them solve problems and make better decisions. And if so, they'll want you around. And if they want you around, they like interacting with you, then they'll buy even what your commodity products and services are. But again, most people's services are products and services are, there's better story to differentiate than even that, and you can apply this model even more easily.
That's great, thank you. And then one last question, we have time for one. This is from Catherine. I think this is a compliment to you, but she's asking, what's the key to becoming a great storyteller? Do you have any tidbits you want to share?
I think the key to becoming a great storyteller is dedicating yourself to it. I think it's binary. A lot of times, even with prospecting, think about prospecting. What's the key to being a great prospector? Sitting down at your desk, doing it all day, and not giving it up. When you do that, you'll pick up tips. You'll find things that work. You'll fall flat in your face. You'll have some successes. You'll build on your successes. 2, 3, 5, 6 months along, you'll be better. There is a story structure on our website, and it's in the book Insight Selling. So just Google Insight Selling and pick up a copy. Chapter 2 is called A Convincing Story, and it helps you understand the structural components of telling a story that inspires. And then just do it. Just practice. Sketch it out. Give it a try. And you'll find that if you just dedicate yourself to it, you'll get better at it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mike. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us today. I know there's a lot of really great takeaways. I think one of the things that stood out for me was the discussion on differentiation and asking yourself, how can I differentiate myself from my competitors? I love that LL Bean example. It's just a good example of how a company can do something simple to stand out and build that brand loyalty. And I guess it boils down to do what you say you're going to do. I also like that idea of collaborating with your buyer and helping them learn something new or feel something different or do something different after you've been with them. So leave them with something. Don't just try and push a product or service on them. So that is going to wrap up our presentation for today. Thank you all for joining us. If you liked what you saw today, you learned something new, feel free to share it on social media. You can tag the Zoho Twitter handle. You can tag hashtag #SellMoreNow. Feel free to contact us or Rain Group if you have more questions. And we hope to see you on a webinar in the near future or answer any other questions that you might have. But thanks again, Mike, for presenting today, and happy selling.